Hello, welcome you all to the study circle, our study circle. It's an important study circle because it's a curtain raiser of sorts for the Hyderabad meeting. From 11 to 15 October, NSI is having its annual periodic study circle, and all of you must have received the note prepared by Comrade Ravi, which on the one hand summarizes the NSI journey and also shares the challenges before us. So what we have decided today is Comrade Bhargav will summarize the presentation, summarize the prelude to Hyderabad, and then we will have discussion around it. I'm just reminded of another note we circulated. 2007, we had our NSI had its meeting in Mysore, and before that we had prepared a preamble to Mysore preamble, which culminated in the NSI document, final document, and we had 2013 we had a conference. So we hope that this prelude to Hyderabad will similar to lead to our concretizing of our own understanding. So I request Comrade Bhargav to make presentation. Comrade Bhargav, please.
Thank you very much, Subhash. Good morning, everybody. As Subhash told, this meeting is specifically aimed at introducing the purpose and topics of coming October 11th to 15th NSI annual study meet at Hyderabad. It is like a prelude and introduction to that meeting. Hope everybody got time to go through the write-up that we shared with all you. That write-up gives you the intellectual conceptual journey that NSI has gone through past 50-20 years. NSI started as a study circle in somewhere around 2004 in a different context, different political organizational context, and later it became increasingly clear that NSI has to become a kind of autonomous forum where broad issues, strategic issues confronting the entire left movement have to be taken up. So the first decade, one can say, it can be said as NSI taking shape, evolving, and coming to grips with its own purpose, and gradually developing a broad general framework through which it can look at the world and analyze things. So in that effort, as Subhash just mentioned, NSI developed try to develop a general framework to see the world away from the way left used to see the world, because the very process of NSI came out of a realization that the traditional left is, even though very busy actively and busy every day, and even though espouses and declares grand strategical goals, but in its understanding it is greatly missing many things, either in grasping the reality or applying concepts. So realization, the deep realization of this serious shortcomings, in a way played a very important background in raising the importance of to form a intellectual political or theoretical political forum like NSI. So in the first decade, NSI came up with after so many discussions and so many brainstormings, finally by 2011 or so, NSI came up with a general manifesto, NSI manifesto. Probably most of you must have seen that document too. It is a very general document, and it takes up broad issues like uh, what is capitalism, what is socialism, and what is revolution, and also what are the new challenges capitalism is posing, and what are the what are the contributions of 20th century socialism, like Russian Soviet socialism or Chinese socialism, and what are the serious shortcomings and problems they encountered, and what new problems cropped up in the past century, uh, and also about the social dimension, which left movement greatly uh, uh, underestimated, or in a way thought that if the problems of system are solved, then solving the social problems will be very easy or automatic. That those aspects also been discussed, and what general approach should be there regarding social dimension, which is distinctly a different domain compared to system. System means political economic system. Everything in the social life cannot be reduced to political economic systems. So by understanding political economic system, we cannot understand each and every other feature of society. This understanding already there in our NSI manifesto, if we go through it. But it's a preliminary attempt to see this two domains differently. The system part, which is very comparatively very easy to observe, understand, analyze, but there is a large parts of society which are not falling in the domain of system, which we can call rest of the society. So those were there. So that realization, that problem is already in a way recognized in the NSI manifesto document, which is passed in 2013, and that is when NSI formally launched as a forum, as an organization. And after that, after coming up with their general understanding, uh, we, NSI focused, started, in fact, in that conference itself, the understanding is that now we have a general framework in our hand. Then we will focus on India in its general features and in its specific challenges. So we can say our theoretical political journey started after 2013 NSI manifesto in understanding with Indian reality in all its manifestations. But that journey also gave us a lot of surprises. In fact, we realized more and more uh, how difficult it is to really grasp a large country like this with very, very long history and with uh, um, so much of diversity. So it's also a very exhilarating and exciting journey. Um, we have covered a lot of distance, and we took up so many aspects, and especially 2000, after 2014, the political developments in the country, when a fascistic BJP came to power and systematically started undoing all the gains that Indian Republic had, whatever gains Indian Republic had after independence in politics, in economics, and even in social cultural aspects. So it, in a way, forced us to think about how come uh, India, which is considered to be more or less a stable democracy, liberal democracy, even though capitalism is there and that should be critiqued and that should be transformed. And liberal democracy is functional despite all its shortcomings, but it appeared that Indian democracy is stable and consistent. It is irreversible. But suddenly 2014 gave everybody of us a great jolt and woke us up from a kind of a naivety or kind of a very um, unexamined faith that democracies once established under a modern constitution and institutions to monitor it and manage it, they cannot be really undone. So that idea has been seriously uh, undermined by the developments that happened in India after 2014. And like everybody, we also have to engage with this harsh reality. And anyway, we were already in the journey of understanding India. This development has actually given us, um, forced us, challenged us to rethink and revisit all our ideas about many things like what is politics and what is electoral politics and what actually is democracy and what is the popular electoral part of democracy and what is the institutional and constitutional aspects of democracy and what is the relationship between modernity and democracy and how society and culture will start participating very actively in electoral politics. Once electoral politics becomes very vigorous, how society and culture and history starts taking part in the electoral politics and how it will generate forces and processes that are very different from regularly imagined liberal democracy, all those things. So all this has pushed our effort to understand India and trying to find uh, strategic alternatives and strategic solutions to the problems India is facing, gave a lot of impetus to these political developments. But not it is one of the important triggers. But I'm not saying that just because of 2014 elections and the new political developments and fascist dangers that are hovering on India, I'm not saying that they are the main reason, but they definitely triggered a lot many thoughts and shaped the way we started discussing things. So in this write-up, Ravi introduces all that. For example, India's political journey. A manifesto is introduced, and later on, uh, in that we have discussed about Indian political journey, how after independence, Nehruvian model got established, which is mixed economy, secularism, and a liberal democracy. And we also know the independence national movement was under the leadership of Gandhi, and Gandhi's idea, even though not secularism, his idea was Sarvadharma Samabhav. All religions should be treated equally and respectfully. Uh, and in fact, he made that slogan as a rallying point to mobilize different religious communities into national movement. And we all know that Gandhi was accepted by all communities, and he mobilized Indian society for the first time for a political project, which is anti-colonial independence movement. But so Gandhi's ideological hegemony was there, and but the independence during the independence, we also know that we passed through a great catastrophe called partition. Partition of two territories, a unified territory into two different countries, it itself may not be a great tragedy, but during that partition, how Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh communities started killing each other and in unprecedented scale. And it also how it gave power to the religious fundamental forces of different religions in our subcontinent, and the effect of those forces we can still see in the subcontinent, in the politics, still they are hovering. Even though India avoided the rise of religious fundamentalism and communalism entering into politics for a while, as long as Nehru was there, and Nehru's ideological hegemony, political hegemony, his charisma, and his uh, leadership was there, India avoided the rise of Hindu communalism, majority communalism. But soon after Nehru's demise, there was a transition period in late 60s and 70s. Then after 80s, we see that this majoritarian Hindu communal politics uh, gradually taking shape and evolving to a very major force, political force. And by 90s, late 90s, they already became a formidable force. We have seen that. So decline of Nehru's ideological hegemony, uh, we have seen that, and we talked about it in our manifesto too. And also critique capital, we try to address the issue of capitalism, how to address how to critique capitalism today. Is it okay that critique of capitalism is already over? Marx has already done that, and remaining parts after 60, 70 years, Lenin has contributed. He discussed imperialism. So, uh, critiquing of capitalism is already over, and there's not much to be done there. That is generally the idea of the left movement. And but NSI understands that it is inadequate. Critique of capitalism fundamentally right. Marxist critique of capitalism is fundamentally right. And but after Marx, in past 120 years or so, what happened to capitalism? Even though it was challenged by revolutions in 20th century in many places, and attempts were made, bold attempts were made to build socialism, but the hard reality is that those socialisms finally succumbed. Those socialist systems finally got defeated. Uh, Capitalism survived, and the capitalism that we are confronting today is very, very different from the capitalism that was there in the time of Marx and even in the times of Lenin. So, what is that, and how do we understand capitalism? What is the main causes behind its longevity, and how actually it is functioning, and what are the new challenges? All those things we recognize. We understood that it is great. It is in We are in great need of developing our understanding of capitalism as it exists today, and we need to enrich our old Marxist theoretical framework to understand capitalism today and develop a critique, and based on that critique, think anew, afresh about socialism of futures. So the moment capitalism, the way we understand capitalism is different today, then our critique will also be different, and definitely our imagination of socialism will also be very different, because 20th century socialism was based on the critique of capitalism of 19th century or early 20th century, and naturally the socialism of those times is based on those critiques and those strategic alternatives. We are definitely living in drastically different world today. So, keeping all these issues were discussed in the manifesto. And coming back to, so that's a backdrop. That's a backdrop. And of once manifesto realized, in a way, manifesto has uh, identified major strategic problems confronting left, not only in India, across the world. In a way, NSI manifesto is not a manifesto for Indian left movement. We can say that it is for the entire left in the global, in the globe. It is taking lessons from the 20th century global left traditions, and it is trying to uh, come up with a set of new problems that accumulated over the past century, which global left most of the global left is either refusing to acknowledge or incapable of addressing because of its dogmatic theoretical approach. So NSA manifesto, in a way, has played the role of identifying the new strategic problems, both theoretical and political, by the left movement across the globe, and try to come up with a framework. Now, so then the journey started to understand India. In this process, for the past 7, 8 years or 10 years, we have discussed various aspects, and we also realized, and we came up theoretically one important understanding that clearly, which was mentioned, which is already there implicit in NSA manifesto, but became increasingly clear, and we came up with a clear formulation that any society cannot be reduced to its political economic system, and there is a large part which is uncovered by the system, that is called, uh, for the convenience, we started calling it rest of the society. And what is this? Social, cultural, intellectual traditions, institutions, processes, values, which are accumulated and got institutionalized, embedded uh, in the social psychology of the people. And also, we started thinking about a category called civilization. Even though it is very difficult to define civilization compared to defining system, or compared to defining social cultural institutions and processes, defining civilization is much more difficult because it is very amorphous, too general, and almost like a background radiation or a background scenario. But nonetheless, we try to cope up with this, try to grapple with this idea, civilization, and we try to understand what is Indian civilization, what is the meaning of Indian civilization, and what are its component parts. We spent quite a bit of a time because we had to educate ourselves to understand this vast thing, and at the same time, uh, very difficult thing to grasp. And we realized the importance of coming up with an idea of civilization if we want to develop an idea about future of India. Previously, left is very clear about changing the system. Capitalism is bad, and socialism, it has to be transformed, and socialism has to be built. So system things were very clear to left. What strategies they proposed and what analysis they made, whether they are correct or not, it's a different question. But at least they are absolutely clear that capitalist system is exploitative and it has to be replaced by a socialist system. But we understood NSI in the past 10 years or so. It is one of the most important issues, understanding system, critiquing the system, and developing strategic alternatives to that system, and generating a program to uh, mobilize a new movement, political movement towards an alternative system like socialism, while recognizing the great importance of that, central importance of that task. And SA also understood that there are other aspects like society and another thing called civilization, which is very important for the future idea of India. So this current coming meeting, Hyderabad meeting, is focused on these issues. There will be two large topics in this meeting. First, most main topic, one can say central topic of this meeting will be India within and India in the world. That is the main topic. And there will be three supplementary tutorials. These supplementary tutorials are imagined as uh, kind of a supplementary in the sense that they will supplement um to the main topic. These tutorials are around political economy, and understanding China, and understanding history of the left in India. So we hope that these three tutorials will provide materials and concepts so that they will be helpful in comprehending the main topic, that is India within and India in the world. So the focus of this main topic, India within and India in the world, there will be three broad domains, or three broad projects. One is, what is the project of the left in the system domain? And second one is, what is the project of the left in the society domain? And what is the project of left in the civilizational domain? Means, what is the project as far as India's long-term future is concerned? What kind of India we want to see? So, this main topic will deal with these three domains: system, society, and civilization. So what will be there in this parts? System part, we know it comprises of basically economy and politics, and class struggle part. Basically class struggle part, in the sense that uh, which classes are ruling and which classes are dominated, which classes are exploited, and what kind of class struggle is happening, and what kind of class struggle is possible. Uh, what kind of new forms of class struggle are already on the horizon, and what kind of class struggles are already there but which doesn't look like class struggles. All those issues will be discussed here in the system part, especially in the context of India, uh, theoretical, conceptual, as well as in the context of India, and how left should recalibrate itself, and how left should revisit its own understanding about the system. And the second part will be society part. And what is society? It's social practices, institutions, belief systems, all those things put together, and it's various identities, historical identities like caste, religion, gender, patriarchy, gender, ethnicity, etc., etc. All these things which are not directly derivable from political economy, which has its own history, their own history, which has their own mechanisms of reproduction, and which has their own interconnection, and which has their own purposes, which has their own consequences in shaping the real culture, in shaping the thought process, in shaping the cultural mind of the people, and in shaping the overall social milieu. So this dimension will be discussed, and what are the serious problems Indian society has, and what is the alternative in that domain. And similarly, in the third domain, civilization, uh, it will be discussed how India, through its journey of past 4,000 years, how India shaped itself. Uh, what are different layers that got added to it in this long journey, and what is its composition? So historically, what is India, and what kind of future India we want to have? So it's basically about idea of India. To have an idea of India about the future, we also need to have a thorough interpretation of historical India, because history of India civilization can be interpreted in different ways by different political forces, uh, basing on their idea about India's future. So it is also it is not just about actual history. It is also about actual history. It's also about ideological orientation. It is also about value orientation. It is also about our interpretation. So it is a very, very challenging domain, developing an idea of India on the basis of actual history, but at the same time certain his ideological orientation. So then if we come back to the three parts, there is a elaboration. For example, the first domain is system domain. In the system domain, what is our project? Our project in the system domain is not only understanding how capitalism is functioning and political system is functioning, and not only to understand what the shape of class struggles and their trajectories, but the main project in the system domain is socialism. System has to be replaced and it has to be transcended and replaced by socialism. Then we have to develop an idea what we are going to do in the domain of system. We want to build socialism. When we say that, then it invariably will be it invariably will start with our critique of contemporary capitalism. Critique of capitalism of 19th century. We cannot base our socialist project on the critique of capitalism which existed in 19th century or even early 20th century. So we have to have a critique of contemporary capitalism, which is which is must, which is starting point. And at the same time, our idea of future socialism also have to have our critique and critical evaluation of 20th century socialism and why it failed or why it faded away. And we need to also come up with a clear statement that why that model of socialism, 20th century model of socialism, is no more applicable, no more can be replicated, why it is outdated. And there are other theoretical issues which will be discussed in great detail in our Hyderabad meeting. One of the great problems faced by socialism in its entire duration in 20th century, either in the Soviet Union or in Russia, China, in other places. Once you build, once you establish socialism, the most important problem you face is that how do you ensure that productivity will continuously um, uh, it continuously enhances. That problem is there because for capitalism that problem doesn't exist because that is a private property ownership and there are capitalists with their own profit maximization goals and they want to maximize their profit, so they are under the tremendous and continuous competition with other capitalists, so they are forced to push to enhance their productivity, enhance, update, innovate new technologies. But socialism faced a great challenge in this regard. Um, because there was always this issue, uh, either working people or the people in socialist system, they should be motivated by a moral incentive, that is working hard, innovating, applying their creativity and trying to develop new ideas, breaking new grounds. All this has to be done by their commitment to socialism as a value. That's called moral incentive. And we know that capitalism is based on material incentive, that it rewards people. Whoever works hard, whoever innovates, whoever develops new idea, they are rewarded in a material sense. They will get bonuses, they will get increments, they get salary hikes, they get promotions, etc., etc. So material incentive always plays a role. And socialism want to build a completely alternative system. So initially it was thought, in the entire 20th century, it was thought that socialism cannot depend itself on material incentive like capitalism, because it will develop, it promotes individualism, individual self, and it is inconsistent with socialist goals. It is inconsistent with socialist ethos. So moral incentive was highlighted. But we know that there were serious problems because of that. And so how much moral incentive and how much material incentive and how long this how to achieve the equilibrium or balance between moral incentive and material incentive, and what happens as socialism advances to higher and higher level phases. These are not just pedantic scholarly theoretical issues. They are directly connected and related to the vitality of socialism, socialist system, dynamics of socialist system, how we can make socialism a very highly productive, comparable and competitive and even far advanced than capitalism. That is the most fundamental problem which 20th century socialism could not solve. And that's the reason why we have to take this issue seriously. And in Hyderabad meeting, we are going to discuss these issues in great detail. And similarly, taking up this issue, like the balance between moral and material incentives, Chinese path uh, played an important role. Of course, it is debatable whether China is capitalist or socialism. That debate is a separate issue. But one thing is clear that China somehow found a path of uh, both moral and material incentives, and uh, develop a very healthy mix or very robust mix of central planning and local initiative, market competition, and central planning. So it seems to have developed its own unique features in addressing and remarkably developed remarkable technological innovation. And we need to understand how China is able to uh, solve this issue. And we get a lot of inspiration from China, and we need to uh, understand Chinese path, especially uh, its development phase up to Mao period and late Mao, post Mao period, what happened up to today. So these are very important issues for future socialism too. Even though whether China is socialist or capitalist, despite the debate is there, but nonetheless, it's very important for us. And similarly, political domain uh, is both economy and polity. We have discussed about economy and socialist project, and there is another aspect which is polity. And we used to think that we can explain uh, social a system, entire system, or even entire society by a model called base superstructure. Economy is base, and superstructure is its politics, its ideology, its culture, and everything else is superstructure. As long superstructure reflects or arises out of base, economic base, and reflects and protects base. So it always corresponds to the base. So economy determines what kind of superstructure you have, and economy is fundamental, and superstructure is in a way a consequence of base. This model used to be there. It is okay to use this model in the system domain because largely a polity is largely determined by economy. For example, if you have a capitalist economy, then your political system, your legal system, your constitution, everything will be in correspondence with the economic relations, capitalist relations. So we can see this direct correspondence of base superstructure in the system domain. But at the same time, it is not that simple either, because in the politics, especially the role of constitution, and at the same time, the moment of constitution has come, then it has to be accountable not only just openly to capitalist class, even though it's a class state, but it cannot be openly a class capitalist state, and it cannot be openly capitalist constitution. Constitution has to address citizens who are equal, who are everywhere and across the class differences. So the values enshrined in Constitution, equality of citizenship, those issues are pose a different. If we consider those issues, then the analysis becomes more rich. Similarly, competitive democracy, which is part of the liberal parliamentary democracy, liberal democracy, constitutional democracies, that competitive democracy will bring in social, cultural, and historical elements into political domain, which are actually outside the system part, but nonetheless they start influencing the political process, which makes political domain more turbulent and more opaque and not easy to simple models like base and superstructure. We need to, and we are going to discuss these problems. What kind of problems will come up because of this? For example, we have seen that how a pre-modern society like India, when it adopts a modern democracy, modern system, modern political system, when the electoral democracy, competitive democracy becomes vigorous and it develops a churning in the society and it mobilizes more and more people from common people from the society into active political participation, then how it brings the psychologies, prejudices, fears, and fault lines and animosities and hostilities between different social groups, different social ideologies into play, into political domain. So Gandhi also used this strategy to mobilize people using their own age-old cultural, religious belief systems and ethos into a modern project of anti-colonial political struggle, which NSA we call depth politics. Depth politics is using for people the culture and historical and other features of a society, people mobilizing those things into a modern project that we call depth politics. And Gandhi is one prime example or the first example, foremost example of depth politics. But he used that depth politics for a very positive thing for colonial, anti-colonial struggle and for independence. But at the same time, we have seen how Hindutva, RSS, these people also used with great dexterity and with great impact depth politics by mobilizing Hindu Muslim fault lines and many belief systems that this country is a country of Hindus. It is a Hindu nation, and we want a Hindu Rashtra. Why can't we have a Hindu nation state, etc., etc. This is also depth politics, and we have seen the great success of it. And both liberals and progressives and left people, everybody are at a loss to face this great challenge because depth politics are tremendously powerful. And how left can face this challenge? First, we have to understand that there is such politics called depth politics, and how we address it because we don't have that root. We cannot utilize religion and other belief systems, other superstitions people have. Left and progressive forces cannot use those things. So, but at the same time, it is difficult to face depth politics. And how do we address this issue? This issue will also come to discussion. And in the same similarly, apart from Indian situation like India, and apart from problems like depth politics, in the entire globe, the liberal democracy itself is in decline. Liberal democracy itself is in great danger. Everywhere, right wing forces are rising, and at the same time, even though elected governments are there, parliaments are there, but at the same time, we also know that there is a deep state lurking behind these uh, uh, actual governments and actual parliaments. And this deep state is playing an important role in developing policy framework and influencing the policy of the states and all that. And deep state, the relationship between deep state and popularly elected authoritarian leaders, for example, Trump or Modi or Erdogan, other people. So the new relationship between deep state and populist autocracy. These leaders are elected because they are legitimate through they get legitimacy because they're elected. But at the same time, there is a deep state which is not elected, which is not even apparent, but which is extremely powerful. And the relation between these two things are shaping the liberal democracies, and people are losing their faith in liberal democracy, and it is increasingly becoming a failed state or rigged state. And how to do this? And right-wing politics are emerging everywhere using this confusion and crisis. And how the state has to deal with people in the one hand, and it has to deal with capital in the other hand. Choices between liberal democracy and autocracy, it is there everywhere, and everywhere liberal democracy is in decline and it is backfooting, and that is one important. And in the social domain, it is this is the system domain, and then second domain this topic is going to discuss is society. In society, modernity will be main issue because old society, patriarchy, gender, religiosity, superstitions, non-rational ideologies, these things have to be addressed. And modernity, we are proposing modernity as the project in social modernity. So this is the second thing. And third is project modernity is about society domain. What left has to do it? Modernity, is it a European model or is it universal? Many things, many friends, many progressives, there is confusion that modernity is a Euro-colonial project, modernity is a Western project, modernity is Eurocentric. We have to get through this labyrinth of confusion, and we have to redefine what is modernity and what is its universal core, and how it can be replicated in all kinds of societies. Of course, each modernity will be different, but there will be universal core, but modernities can be multiple kinds. Like capitalism is also, its universal logic is same, but how capitalism looks very different in different societies. Similarly, modernity has a universal core and what it is and how it can be implanted, or it can be installed, or it can be replicated in different societies. This is one important issue. And this context, what is the role of social movements, either anti-patriarchal movement, women's movement, or Dalit Bahujan movement against caste discrimination, minorities, religious minorities movements, various kinds of social movements? How to understand what is their importance? So that is one important discussion we have to take up in the society domain. That is called uh, uh, Project India, or Project Modernity. And third is Project India. As I discussed, why left has no failed to develop its own idea of India. It only talks about socialism. It only talks about democracy, but it doesn't have a specific idea of India. For that we need to develop our own understanding of Indian civilization as a historical reality, at the same time historical imaginary. We need to have our interpretation and imagination on the basis of historical facts. And for that, we need to uh, get ideas and inspiration from axial age concepts, axial age civilizations, and what are the lessons, and how modernity is a byproduct or the direct product of our continuation of our second axial revolutions. Based on that, we need to bring out our idea about India, future India. Uh, Similarly, not only about India inside, but also problems are there India in the world, because geopolitical things are drastically changing, and a new multipolar world is emerging, and India is nowhere, even though it is so large, and it is even though apparently third largest economy, but still nowhere geopolitically. And how India can gain its dignity, how it can gain its equal respect globally, and what lessons we can from China, and at the same time, how different we are from Chinese case. Importance of pan-Indian civilizational identity. Can we revoke? Can we develop such thing? So these are the issues that will be covered in this. And tutorials will be on political economy, critique of contemporary capitalism. And second tutorial will be on China, how China emerged as a great superpower, what it has done. And third tutorial will be on the history of the left, turning points in Indian communist movement in important phases since its inception in 1925, and especially from Second World War and up to today. These three tutorials will be there. Thank you very much. I have taken a lot of time, and hope you will discuss now.
शुक्रिया भार्गव, आपने पूरा विस्तार से बताया, एक हम लोग की एनएसआई जर्नी की एक अच्छी समरी रखी, और कैसे हम लोगों ने पारंपरिक वाम से अलग ढंग से देखने की शुरुआत की इस चीजों की तरफ, और कैसे हम लोग को अलग अलग समझदारी हमारी बनती गई उसके बारे में, और इस मीटिंग में कैसे जो जो नए मुद्दे हमारे सामने हैं उनकी भी एक अच्छी समरी आपने रखी। चाहे वो इंडिया के क्षेत्र में हो, चाहे मॉडर्निटी के क्षेत्र में हो, सोशलिज्म के क्षेत्र में, कैसे हम लोग नए देखने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। और साथ साथ जो 3 ट्यूटोरियल्स हमारे होंगे, चीन चीन को लेकर के जो हमारा ट्यूटोरियल है, जिसमें चीन का जो बात है, जिसको लेकर के जो एक नए ढंग से सीखने की हम लोग को आवश्यकता है, पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी को लेकर के भी क्या क्या नई बातें हैं, और साथ साथ वाम के इतिहास को लेकर के, इत्तेफाक से वाम के 100 साल पूरे हो रहे हैं, तो संदर्भ में अहम मुकामों को जानना भी बहुत जरूरी है। तो बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया। और जैसा कि हम लोग करते हैं कि मेन प्रेजेंटेशन के बाद साथी अपनी बात, एक जो सवाल या कमेंट रखते हैं, तो आई रिक्वेस्ट एवरीवन टू शेयर हिज व्यूज और शेयर हिज कमेंट्स और क्वेरीज टू व्हाट to put Pargo's presentation. Please.
Thank you, Bhargav. I know it's a huge task to present what we are going to discuss for 5 days. in an hour. But the main themes that we are deliberating upon among ourselves in NSI, and what are the core issues that we want to discuss with other interested members, is you have put it across quite well. But if I am listening to it for the first time, then without reading it, if I come to this, then it is too much to absorb. It feels like that. There are many interesting things to ponder over. So you did a good job in bringing all the issues into your presentation. Thanks to you for that.
Comrade Burusu has raised his hand. Please unmute yourself and
Yeah, good morning, comrades. All. Thank you very much, Bhargav, for a prelude that you've given for the Hyderabad meet. Very interesting topics to be covered, and a lot of good learning we're supposed to have during the 5 days. I would like to add, or I would like to request the organizers to consider that there is a what we call now the world order change that's happening in front of us. The China is taking over as the superpower of the world, and of course, you mentioned about a special study on China and then how it took as a global leader and all the aspects of it. But then I think we need to discuss about the uh, the global order change and how it's going to affect the supply chain issues, and then how it's going to reshape the global patterns in terms of, like, for example, the authoritarian socialistic kind of scenario that came forward in this new scenario, in this new emerging scenario, and then how it is going to affect the changes that are going to have in the especially in the political front, how it's going to affect that, and then how whether it's going to influence rapid changes or whether it is going to suppress the changes that are supposed to have happened. For example, the so-called U.S. leadership for more than 6 decades or 7 decades post Second World War has led to a kind of liberal democracy across the globe for at least for the first 4 or 5 decades, and in the final decades probably turned into a right wing socialist, right wing fascistic kind of leaderships and societies that have. That it transformed into. But then, at least in the initial stages, that they have given a sort of image of liberalistic democracy. But then, in the final stages, it turned into fascistic regimes. Uh, do we see such in this new global leaders that global leadership that has emerged? Are we going to see similar changes in the society? I think we need to have a discussion on these aspects so that we can strategize and we can understand, especially in terms of, for example, supply chain issues, and then how these are going to confluence into a sort of modernistic changes in the third world countries and underdeveloped countries. That is going to be the key question, I think, that we need to address in this meet so that we are prepared for that as well. Uh, uh, to understand this major change that's happening in front of our eyes. I think we need to really focus on this aspect. That's my suggestion for all to come consider. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Bhargav, for sharing. While listening to what Bhargav shared, I was also trying to kind of get back to study circle where we began and where we are. Yeah, and also trying to connect with Ravi, the note or the paper that which he has shared. So in that sense, it was helpful to connect and view. And I agree with Madhavi in a way that there is so much ground that we have covered. When I look at this, that paper, that which is going to be on basis for the discussion at Hyderabad, there are so many aspects that we have talked which are not there. I mean, I think it need to come in. A couple of points while listening to it and also getting back in touch with the note which came to me is that, for example, this idea of modernity and idea of axial civilizations is something that
as NSI that we are bringing very actively into consideration to understand who we are, etc. All that. There was one question which came up, which earlier I had put aside, is that when we talk about depth politics, we broadly will say that depth politics, which was accessed by Gandhi in a way that which mobilized and brought people into political process, which is in a way a kind of with his own idea of secularism, and now it is being used by the right wing forces, and we completely, in a way, say that as left we cannot access it because necessarily accessing the depth politics means kind of falling into religious thing. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think at the same level, when we talk about modernity, we also say that the scientific values of modernity are universal, but culturally they are different. If I kind of imagine Indian, let's say, modernity, then Indian modernity's cultural aspect will necessarily be connected with the historical movement of, let's say, Indian mind. So in that sense, we also should be able to access the depth of it. I mean, I can only think of, let's say, non-Vedic traditions, and we in our own study circle talked about how, let's say, the Sanskrit as a language and the positions that we take can be problematic. For example, the science, the work of mathematics or the literature, we kind of own as part of my, let's say, civilizational contribution. In that sense, I was thinking, how do we position a modern Indian individual with a part of it universal and also cultural, and exploring what does that cultural values could be very interesting. That's one thought that which came to me while looking at it. And the second one is that when we talk about this global right wing thing coming up, then can we understand that with a global phenomena, or is it also there is something specific to India? What that could be was another question that which came to me. No response is said, but it's an interesting thing. Is do we how to what extent it's together and to where it is separate, and hence we need to have a little more deeper understanding. There is one more thought. I mean, I don't know whether I can share. I mean, it's not really thought out, so it could be a little silly, stupid. But anyway, I will say that is that if we want to look at this entire kind of right wing coming back in a way, world over, in a way, to the power, is it can it be looked at as some kind of resistance against project modernity? In a way that till the project modernity and project capitalism could kind of move together, it was okay. But when the project kind of, I mean, I was looking at what's the ideal outcome of modernity deepening is emergence of an individual who may not be free but at least autonomous from the own cultural moorings, can kind of think differently and rationally for on behalf of others, let's say. So in that sense, that is dangerous. I mean, in a way that a deepening of project modernity will actually work against capitalism because it kind of concentrates power among few. So hence, at the junction where that is happening, a backlash of capitalist power continuing through activating deeper civilizational forces might be happening. I think is it in a way is it a step forward?
Maybe we can take the discussion forward. And I mean, I'm sure other comrades will come up with more comments and questions, but I can make a few comments in the light of what Bhargav has presented and the questions have come. Before coming to specific issues, let me add to, as a preface, that we must keep in mind why NSI is trying to come up with this framework, or has come up with this framework. I may clarify that NSI or we have no desire to be different from everybody. We have no desire to look as innovators or pioneers of some new framework. We have been forced to think about these things by how the global situation has evolved, in last 50 years, as well as how politics has evolved in India in 50 years or more in recent 15 years or so. There was a question in the chat box, isn't it a task to unite all the left forces, to do something so that all the left forces are united? And that is the, you can say that is the mission, or that is the task, even though NSI is too small a force, doesn't carry much influence, doesn't carry much weight. So we have no illusions that we can play some effective role in actually uniting the left forces, because that will require other capabilities to have, organizational capabilities and following to have. So because of those limitations, we have focused on the aspect which you can call theoretical historical aspects. In order to unite left forces, you will have to be a political force. And being a political force involves many things. It is not a matter of coming up with a new framework or proposing some new theoretical innovation. But the other side is that political forces are there, parties are there, leaders are there, and yet this disintegration in left is there, or disunity, let us say, in left is there. And not only that, overall, barring a few remarkable gains here and there, generally, overall, left has been on a kind of decline in our country. So there must be some other reasons other than the capability of parties and political forces. We, of course, are not a party, or we are not a political force on that scale, but other left political forces and parties that are there, their political wisdom and political influence and political organization is there. And despite that, if left has been on decline, there have to be other reasons too for left to decline. And that you can connect with the global decline of left. So that is what, from the very beginning, why has left faced globally as well as in India a very rough half century. For last 50 years or so, roughly, left has been at times slow and at times quite rapid decline. Part of that thing we dealt with in the manifesto, as Bhargav was saying. Those were the general part, that the capitalism itself has changed. And if you don't know how to fight against this changed capitalism, and if you don't know how to critique this changed capitalism, and you critique a capitalism that existed a century ago, and capitalism through history has learned many things and twisted and turned and maneuvered, and come up with a new modus operandi, especially in the post-colonial era, after end of colonialism, then critiquing old capitalism, does not help us, in the politics of the day. That was one thing we realized in manifesto, and we said a few things about that, how capitalism had changed its modus operandi in the post-colonial era. And old style critique of old style imperialism will not work. And the same way, perhaps even a bigger challenge for left was that why did 20th century socialism come to an end? come to an end, it came to an end spectacularly in the collapse of Soviet Union. And as many in the left say, that it came to an end also because China changed its course. China left the, path of the Mao period and took a new path of what many would consider capitalist path or capitalist development. Those things were dealt with in the manifesto. Those were, as Bhargav was saying, was this was the global part. After that, we have focused more on India. And in India, we have started, even though a lot of our talk and a lot of our writings appear to be theoretical and at times may appear to be removed from the way politics happens on ground on a day-to-day basis. Actually, we have been forced to think things over mainly because of the day-to-day politics. And I can say mainly because of the emergence of Hindutva forces, on the Indian scene, Hindutva fascism. That has been the challenge. And even if one is not a political force and is not in a position to confront Hindutva in the political arena per se, it is possible to think about, because the political arena is right in front of us, whether we may or may not be an effective participant in that, but political arena is in front of our eyes, and we can see and we can understand to the extent information is available to us. So that is what we have done. That what would be challenge if we were the main force, let us say, imagine that if we were the main force with the responsibility of defeating Hindutva fascism, what challenges we would face and what one will have to do. And that is, this initial comment is in the reverse order. I will start with the third part, which is the civilizational part. That is what forced us to think about, what separates the Indian political arena from the political arena of any other country or from the global political arena. Of course, the straight answer is that India is a republic. India is a sovereign country. And sovereign country in this age of nation states is such that politics is primarily in the national arena. Politics is primarily in the internal, is primarily an internal political arena. But that does not solve the problem. That does not solve the problem, as we have written in the note also, and as we have discussed often in our study circles and everywhere, is that if you say, you have to answer the question, what keeps India together? Why do we talk about India? Why does Indian Republic exist? Or you can put it negatively, that why isn't there any major movement in India for right to self-determination, including right to secede? Why doesn't any major part of India wants to separate from India? No. So the reason for unity of India, the political unity of India, the reason must not be only formal political of the modern times, namely the republic, the constitution, the state, the laws, and so on, and the history of the national movement, that brought independent India into existence. For 75 or 80 years, for it to largely continue despite all the failures of the political system, for it to continue together, there has to be some underlying cause for this unity. Very roughly speaking, that is and I also know that looking for cultural, civilizational underlying cause for the unity of Indian Republic, is also taken to be a dangerous line to take, or dangerous, path to tread. Why are often progressives and liberals wary of talking of civilizational unity of India? Because the counter example is right in front of our eyes. Counter example is that of Hindutva India, Hindu India. They are the ones who have talked for last 100 years that there is some underlying unity of India. There is some underlying cultural civilizational definition of India, and they have taken that path to know where where India has reached. Now they are ruling India. So this very malignant, very dangerous idea of India has become the most powerful idea of India. Among all the competing ideas of India, the worst one, which is communal, which is based on majoritarian fascism, which imagines history, not as history is known, but which imagines history, according to its own project of creating a Hindu Rashtra. That is right in front of our eyes. And no competing idea of India has been attempted on a larger scale, other than the competing idea of India of the national struggle of Gandhi and later of Nehru. Right now, in the political arena, there is no large-scale competing idea of India. And that we see, that we diagnose, is one of the reasons for the liberal forces, for Nehruvian liberal forces, for their decline. And that also has contributed to the marginalization of left forces. The liberal forces have come up with an idea of India which simply says that India has existed as a unity in diversity, that India is very diverse, many languages, many religions, many different cultures, and we have existed together. Okay, that's not exactly true that we have peacefully existed together, but I don't want to haggle. If the fascists have a reason to imagine an India, the liberals also have a right to imagine India. So, okay, you have a right to imagine India, and you imagine India as a diverse India, as a India which is like a bouquet of cultures. But if you do not answer the question that what keeps the bouquet together, what keeps all the different, flowers together, different, why, what is the basis of unity in diversity? If you do not answer, somebody will come with a more robust answer, and you will not be able to contend with that robust answer in the political arena. Right now, the robust answer has been that India is Hindu India. That has been there. As 100 years ago, India was defined as India is different from its rulers, namely the British. India is a civilization. And in that, it was enough to say that whatever strands, whatever components of Indian civilization you counted, all of them were from India and not from Britain and not from elsewhere. So if you said that India is at the same time Vedic and Upanishadic and Bodh and Jain and Muslim, Sanskrit and Persian, all of this together, if you called India, that was good enough to put this thing together to confront the British. Because whatever you counted as being defining feature of India, that was easily counterposed to the British colonialism. I will come to the modernity question later, but at that time it was also, Gandhi also called it modernity, the European modernity, and he was opposed to that. But let us set modernity question aside. colonialism was the enemy, and this bouquet called India, which was very diverse, which was multicultural, multilingual, and even had always been politically fragmented, other than few times when large empires, Maurya or Gupta or Mughals, other than those periods, most of the time India was highly fragmented. When the British left, they gave independence not only to the Congress-led political forces, but also to 550 feudal principalities or whatever, small feudalities or kingdoms, So despite the fragmentation and despite multiculturality, India could be defined as one vis-a-vis colonialism. So that has been one idea of India. And the other idea of India is Hindu India. Practically, these have been, by and large, these two India. And the idea of anti-colonial India does not work anymore simply because colonialism is not there. And if colonialism is not there, then India will figure out what it is. So the answer about, you can define who are we as opposed to others, that I can say, I am not you, but then still the question remains, who am I? So no matter, there may be a period when there is a very powerful, significant other. And if I say you are the powerful ruling over me, and I say that I am not you, in order to fight you, that may be enough. That may be enough of my definition. But once I have defeated you, then I have to figure for myself, who am I? And this who am I question about India has not been settled. And we are saying that it is not a matter of choice. It is not a matter of choice that, you say, oh, what is the need of going into these philosophical things? Who are we? Let academics, haggle among themselves, what is idea of India. It doesn't work in the political arena. But that is not true. Exactly opposite is true. In the political arena, over a hard work of last 100 years of the communal forces, once it led to partition, and now it has led to Hindu India in the independent India. In last 75 years of hard work, they have come to a hegemonic position. It's a very easily, commonly accepted idea by the masses at large, or a large section of the masses at large, that India is Hindu India. If all other religions have their own nations, Christians have many, Muslims have many, and so on, what is the problem of Hindus having their own country and their own state? That is a very popular idea that has a great political attraction, attractive force. That is what we are seeing in front of our eyes. And how to counter that? Can we counter that by unity and diversity slogan? Can we counter that by India is defined vis-a-vis others, that India is not China, or India is not Europe, or India is not America? Will that suffice? We will argue, and we will discuss more in Hyderabad. We are arguing that that will not be enough. India will have to figure out how does it imagine itself. We know that it is not a question of actual history alone. So we say that civilization is something that we have to imagine ourselves who we are, not exactly counting everything that happened in the history of India. Counting everything that happened in history of India and placing everything in the proportion of its weight at the time it happened, its weight in history. That is not how any people or any civilization imagine themselves. They don't get a PhD in history and then they come to a realization that, why am I an Indian? Okay. They don't have to read anything. Everybody imagines something, that who we are, who do we belong to? What is our culture, civilization, and soil? So it is partly imagination. The problem with Hindu imagination is that it is not historically based. Okay. And so they have to concoct history. They have to turn mythology into history. So you know how they have come to power. They have come to power largely through convincing people that mythology is history. That Ram was born at such and such place, and a mosque, was erected right at the spot where he was born. And so we have to reclaim that, and now you must have noticed that even ex-Chief Justice of India, seems to subscribe to that idea that, there is a historical evidence that, something like that may have happened, So you see that turning into mythology into history, and then calling that history, and then calling that is who we are. That is the idea of India. That is what makes us Indians. That is to be confronted, through a historical imagination. And we are proposing that we have to imagine a civilization historically. And we have to take a historical attitude to history. By that, I mean, that may sound tautology, but historical approach to history is that history is not everything that happened in the past. Because everything that happened in the past will never be known. The farther you go into past, less evidence you have of what actually happened. So there is no escape from you imagining, about what happened in the past. Partly, our strength will be that we will imagine which will not contradict what we know about history. So we will include all known history, but there is not a lot of unknown history. We have to put the picture together, and then we have to imagine, what happened. And one example I always give is that when you imagine why India is called a civilization and why it is often also called a glorious civilization, if you count that and look at it historically, means you don't look at, take Panini, the great Sanskrit grammarian, or take Aryabhatta, the great, mathematician and astronomer from Gupta period. Both of them were Brahmins. Most of the great achievements of ancient India may be done individually by Brahmins. And this is the time, this is the era of fighting Brahminism, or fighting Manuvad as it is called, because this Brahminism and Manuvad has oppressed large part of India for thousands of years. And then you say that all the achievements of Indian civilization in ancient period, if you count them, mostly you find that Brahmins were great grammarians, philosophers, astronomers, mathematicians. Then what do you do? Okay. And then if you confine yourself to social movements or to the value system of today, you will have to reject whole of ancient India. As Hindutva is trying to reject whole of medieval India, whole of Muslim India. They want to wipe that period out, or they want to remember that period only through people like Rana Pratap and Shivaji. So largest political reality was that Mughal Empire was there, but they want to remember India as Rana Pratap, who fought, against Akbar, did not succeed, but just because he fought against Akbar, making all sacrifices and with all the courage, he becomes the icon. But how do you look at the history of that period? Okay. So as they want to wipe out the Mughal period, our movements will wipe out the ancient period, because the ancient period was largely Sanskritic and Brahminical, because Buddhism was defeated. And if you want to, one approach has been, including that of Ambedkar, is to resurrect in some ways Buddhism. But then we will have to also answer that Buddhism, a great accomplishment of India, probably the greatest accomplishment of ancient India, was finally defeated in India. Okay. And when it was defeated in India, then our claiming Buddhism as the only glory is like Hindutva claiming Rana Pratap and Shivaji as the only source of glory. You see the argument I am making. You see the point I am making. The historical approach to history will require that while you may have your icons, you still have to explain history. If you identify with some religion or some philosophy or some ruler, and that what you identify with, that was defeated, you will have to explain your own defeat also. Why did that defeat happen? Because that part is historical. But more important part is that when you integrate entire history, when you take history of India on its millennial scale for a few thousand years, do you reject it completely, the first 2000 years, and then you accept the later 1000 years or 1500 years? Will that approach work? That approach in the long run will not work. So that is what we are arguing. We have to think about that. We have to think about how to claim the glories of Indian civilization while continuing our fight against Brahminical ancient India, while being opposed based on today's values, today's norms of modern times, values of modern times. The caste structure has to be completely negated. And caste structure was very strong 1000 years ago or 2000 years ago. And the India that was completely under the grip of caste structure and Sanskritic Brahminism, that India also had Panini, also had great grammarians, also had great literateurs, also had great mathematicians. So what do you do? That is the question we are posing to ourselves. And the answer is very helpful. Answer is helpful that you do not impose today's value on Panini, at least on the great people. Today's value, I mean, I am no expert of Ashtadhyayi, but I am told that in Ashtadhyayi, in the examples of his grammar that he gives, partly history of that times or ideologies of that times also show up, even though Ashtadhyayi is a grammar book, but the society and philosophy also shows up. And that may be Brahminical. Panini, whenever he speaks about other things, I don't know, but my guess is that will turn out to be a Vedic Brahmin. Okay, because he was extracting grammar from the language of the Vedas. That is the scientific work he was doing. He was systematizing the Sanskrit language. So, but his views, like that of a scientist today may be a fascist. Very famous German scientists were fascists. Who stayed with Hitler. You cannot reject the work of a Pascual Jordan, who was one of the originators of quantum mechanics, just because he was a fascist, and he was a fascist, So the same thing happens with Panini, with Kalidas, with Aryabhatta. If they appear to be Brahminical, still they were grammarians, they were philosophers, they were scientists, they were mathematicians. So when Hindutva is being forced to have an idea of India that is based on mythology, we are saying that an idea of India that the other side should have, liberals, progressives, left should have, is the idea of India which is historical and which recognizes the great achievements of ancient India, even though if you look at the individual who was responsible for a great achievement, that may be a Brahmin. Okay. And that becomes very controversial. Wherever we talk in the social movements, it becomes very controversial. But we are arguing that the social movements, including left, is not thinking straight. How do you resign from India if you prove that whole of India was culturally our enemy, when it was Brahminically dominated, when it was Sanskritic, when people's languages were, did not come up, and people were shackled. Most of the people were shackled with the caste system under Savarna hegemony. How do you resign from this India? Attempts are there. Ambedkar in a way tried to resign from India by saying that I will not die a Hindu. But that has its limitations. What has happened to that project? You can see how much that is possible. Okay. So these questions have forced us into rethinking what kind of idea of India we will have to work out. Point number one is that you can't escape the political necessity of idea of India. If you do not have an idea of India, you will be defeated in the political arena. Right now, people have been defeated in the political, not only because of that, but it plays a large role that Hindutva idea of India has defeated liberal modern political forces, including the left. And they have a challenge. So you can't escape that responsibility. And once you have that responsibility, then you have to work out how do you claim India, despite, historically, with all the weaknesses, with all the atrocities, with all the oppressions, that ancient India, a small minority did on the large majority, despite that, you will have to work out how do you claim that India, what part of that India you claim, and how do you construct that idea of India. So that is the third part that Bhargav referred to, the Project India. Project India has started from very concrete political challenge of defeating Hindutva fascism. And neither left movement, nor social movement, nor liberal political forces have succeeded in that. They are on the defensive in face of aggressive Hindutva. And okay, I am not saying that left will defeat Hindutva fascist. Left will have to work with the liberal progressives, secular progressives to defeat Hindutva, and liberal progressives, because of the compulsions of electoral democracy, may come up with this or that tactical move of caste census, of, uniting. Basically, in one word, if I put it, the only feasible way in the actual electoral arena is to confront Kamandal with Mandal. Okay. That may be there is truth to that. You may not challenge the Hindutva hegemony without bringing in the caste hierarchy and caste oppression. That may be there. But still, it becomes very difficult to defeat Hindutva because they also do what they call social engineering. They also manage caste balance of forces, including large part of Dalits, or significant portion of Dalits, have gone to the Hindutva side, or vote for them, or participate in their governments, and so on. And so has been the case with OBCs, So you can see that they have all the caste engineering tactics with them. And on top of that, they have this overarching idea of India, which is Hindutva idea of India, which is not totally unacceptable to OBCs as they exist and Dalits as they exist. If it was totally unacceptable, then they wouldn't have gone to them. Okay, so you see the challenge that despite them being Brahminical and Savarna, there is no doubt about Hindutva, they have been able to make inroads into other castes, significant inroads into other castes, depending on what part of country you are talking about, unevenly, in north differently than in south and so on. But still they have made those inroads, and they have been facilitated by, on top of all that caste diversity, they are able to propose a Hindu India, and that Hindu India, large part of OBCs and large part of Dalits do not see any problem with that. Okay, so that is the challenge you have, that you can easily fight them by showing that how middle caste and lower caste are oppressed in the Savarna worldview, in the Savarna, ideology. You can prove that. But along with that, you will also have to show that how the idea of India, our idea of India, fits much better with our social ideas, our ideas of social justice, our ideas of class justice. So while we stick with our ideas of class justice, while we include social justice as an integral part of left program, to those two things, we add this idea of India also, that, why is India India? And why is India an integral political arena? Can you just say that in 1947 we got the independence together, that is why we will live together forever? Otherwise, what will be the common thing? I mean, in other words, you can say that what is Indian nation? Is there an Indian nation? No matter what definition of nation you come up with, it is very hard to come up with the definition of Indian nation. You can have come up with the idea of Indian Republic instituted in the Constitution, conceptualized in the Constitution, but you can't come up with an easy idea of Indian nation. Tamil language is very different from Punjabi, is very different from Bangla, and most of the history is also locally, the history has been very different. There have been very few times when Bengal and Punjab and Tamil Nadu all have lived under one India and one ruler, and one system. In the 3,000 years of history, there have been very few times that has happened. So how do you define an Indian nation? There is no, and you can't say that India as a nation is not viable, so it should become many nations. Because if it should become many nations, then as I said in the beginning, there would have been many movements for self-determination, many movements to separate from Indian Republic, and those are not there. And we say that that time is gone. That kind of large scale movement for separation from India is not going to be feasible, and it is not even good for Indian people. If India fragments into nations, Tamil nation and Punjabi nation and Bangla nation, that is not good for Indian people as a whole. That is where modern times have taken us. So there is no escape from having an idea of India, whereas India is not one nation. So then you have to go to some kind of historical India, and that historical India, which will be partly imagined India, that is what we call Indian civilization. Okay. We can't really imitate China because Chinese history has been very different, and China has been more unified as a civilization most of its history. So their job is easier than ours. Our job is very difficult because we are very diverse and our history has been very fragmented. And yet there is something to learn from China. In modern times, there is something for every large country. The dimension of civilization and the dimension of history is going to play an important role. And to the extent it is going to play an important role, and to the extent liberals have forgotten about this need, that gives rise to rise of the right wing, because right wing talks about who are we, in America, Huntington, his second book, the first book was Clash of Civilization, but his second book was Who Are We, and he defined Americans vis-a-vis the Spanish, people, the Spanish population, which was the largest majority at that time, maybe still be the largest minority, largest cultural minority, will be Hispanics in US. And Huntington defined, basically how white Christian white America, is who are we, vis-a-vis who? Vis-a-vis the Hispanics. And now Donald Trump says vis-a-vis Muslims, and vis-a-vis South Asians, and vis-a-vis Indians, and vis-a-vis all the immigrants, so you see this challenge is all over the world. If you just define political arena as a arena of the republic or arena of the nation, at least in the very large countries with diverse populations, it does not work. Okay. Because somebody or the other will raise this question of who are we, and if you are not defining it properly, that person will define it on the basis of religion or on the basis of race. And both are wrong. On the basis of religion and on the basis of race, defining who are we is wrong. So that is the challenge. So that is, I have taken enough time, but let me just add one more thing. That while we are talking about civilization, you know that we started from concrete political challenge of Hindutva. And we know that we are not going to defeat them only civilizationally, only by our idea of India. Along with that, we will have to have our struggle in the system part, which is the economic struggle and political struggle, political struggle of democracy and economic struggle of, economic justice, finally socialism. And in the social arena, we will have to have our social movements of all the oppressed communities of India, whether they are oppressed on the basis of caste or gender or religious identity. So all these things are to be put together. And whenever we talk of a new thing, and we are talking about this idea of India as a new thing, as far as left is concerned, people often get confused that we are completely changing the course, as if we are giving up class struggle, and as if we are giving up all social struggles, against caste oppression or gender oppression or oppression of minorities on the basis of religious identity. We are not leaving any one of them. These three domains that, as Bhargav was presenting from the write-up, the domain of system, the domain of society, and the domain of civilization, they are all interconnected, but also their time scales are very different. It's not that when you are doing class struggle and when you are figuring out that under today's capitalism, for example, when gig workers are a very large, when there is large unemployment and people are getting self-employed, or in cities there are gig workers, they can't be unionized easily. If that is a challenge, that challenge cannot be addressed by idea of India. That challenge will have to be taken there in the society as it happens, in the economic battlefield, in the political battlefield, that will have to be taken up. So be clear that we are not proposing idea of India as a solution for all problems. Mostly left will have to be engaged in class struggle. Mostly the progressive forces, all of them together, will have to engage in class struggle plus social struggles against caste oppression, and religious oppression and gender oppression, gender-based oppression. But while you are doing that on a large scale, in order to challenge large political forces such as Hindutva, you will have to have all these three dimensions work together, even though they work in different ways and on a different time scale. So the last thing I would say is that when we are talking about, I haven't said much about class struggle part and the social struggle part, but let me just we can take in the second round of discussion. But let me just conclude that when we are talking about idea of India, mostly people say that, oh, your idea of India is very, very theoretical. Who will understand that? And that is very true. If you want to take idea of India immediately to people, it will become Hindu idea of India. Because of the way our society is, you cannot teach history and your historical imagination to whole of India by giving lectures like ours. It is a political project. It will take time. It may take 100 years or 50 years for an alternative idea of India to become popular in India. For a long time to come and for significant period to come, the idea of India may be religion-based, maybe Hindu idea of India and so on. But you can't fight it if you don't start somewhere. So you have to have a vanguard of the society agreeing to this idea of India and then work in various ways to take this idea of India in the political arena to confront Hindutva or other malignant forces. The problem is not that idea, our idea of India is not there in the public. The problem is that our idea of India is not there among the vanguard, among the educated, among the elite of the, progressive elite of the society. So this idea of India first has to be established in the vanguard of the society, in the progressive elite of the society, in the educated sections of the society, at least that part of educated sections which is willing to come over to the progressive side. So that is that, and that confusion is often there, that when you are talking of idea of India, can you talk about it on the chauraha, on the street, in a mass public rally? Can you talk of that idea of India? And we say that that is not possible. But the academics, the scholars, the public intellectuals have not done this job. You look at the entire field of academia, of a scholarship, of public intellectuals. What is their idea of India? Their idea of India either does not exist, as it in the case of left. Left does not have an idea of India. Left only talks about anti-colonial nationalism, or internationalism. The liberals have only the Sarva Dharma Sambhav. All of us have lived always peacefully together, and we should live peacefully together, giving respect to each other. Very nice feeling, but the nice feeling does not translate into, strong political positions. So the Nehruvian idea of India, much better as it is, very good as it is, but treating that as whatever happened in Indian history, let us all put together, and that is what we will call India. So India will be Vedic, India will be Bauddha, India will be Jain, India will be Tantric, India will be Islamic, India will be Mughal, and India will be modern. All put together, that will be India. This also does not work. Okay. So when you have this challenge that even the most educated, most erudite, most informed people of the Indian society have not worked out an unified idea of India, then how do you expect that suddenly a small group of people, when they start talking about idea of India, that idea can be immediately taken to the people? We realize that it will be an elite idea. It will be idea of scholars. It will be idea only among political activists. And when they will go to people, they may not be able to talk about idea of India, but they will be convinced that this is why we are Indians, and that will inform all their work, That is the task about idea of India. when you go to the social, class mode and social movement mode, you have more practical challenges on the ground, and we can discuss that in the second round.
Thank you, Ravi. कुछ और क्वेश्चंस थे इसमें चैट बॉक्स में, क्या तुमको कुछ लेना चाहोगे? Devi had shared a question earlier, and after that, Comrade Vinci is also there's a question, and Comrade Malti Palla.
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. It's wonderful, actually, the narration of what you put up on the question of India. It's really puzzling, and it's really complicated and very complex. And yeah, but then the point that I would like to raise is that the imagination of India mostly stems from the Puranas. The imagination of Indians is largely captured by these two epics called Ramayana and Mahabharata, and probably the influence of these two epics have emerged into the idea of India, and then probably that is what is controlling. And perhaps what you are referring to, the so-called elite, which have also failed to address the question of India, or questioned or framing their idea of India, is mostly influenced by these two epics. And then that is really, it is impossible to unlearn this idea of India from the imagination of so-called Indians, and then to erase it. And so it's even to, I think, if you, as you are mentioning, that the fascists and then fascistic scientists in Germany were supporting Hitler on the basis of race, and then that kind of imagination, it probably stemmed from their cultural roots, and perhaps that is what that is what is happening in India for a long time now. And as you have pointed out rightly, the question of Aryabhatta, the question of Panini, the question of Kalidas, all these are really sort of gives a kind of pseudo, or maybe realistic kind of pride for the Indian cultural history, that framed in a sort of as what really we Indians are. But then the real question is, do we, although we can pose this question, what really India is, and emerge a new idea in the sense that this is probably what the India was, and India is, and then what to be an Indian is. But the question is, like, can we convince the larger masses, unless they get disillusioned with the idea of this particular Hindu, the term Hindu, which I believe is emerged out of these two Puranic texts. I think that is where the roots of these Hindutva probably lies, in those two Puranic epics, and then that is where to erase that, and this new identity, unless people get disillusioned themselves, that this is not going to work. Which means that the Hindutva tag is not really helping the course of Indian nation to become either, say, a larger power, or self-reliant, or progressive, or more democratic, or more at least economically stable kind of thing, and is only helping a few of the elite, or few of the bourgeois classes. Unless people realize that and get disillusioned with this idea of Hindutva, I don't think the real change that is expected to defeat the Hindutva fascism is going to be the face of is going to be really happening, and the real face of the societal trend. But that is, as you said, that is not really the immediate task. But then to build up the idea of Indian nationalism, and or what India as a nation or Indian citizenship means, that is a very large question, and that is really a complicated and question. But then my point is that to address this question and to really come out with at least some scientific and meaningful ideas regarding this is very much essential. I agree with you on this aspect, and a large course of discussion could be very, very useful on that. Thank you.
Ravi, called Malti Palla, she has raised the question, and she also wants to So similar question is there.
Yeah, I think Malti should speak, and also Virinchi should speak. You know, his
Yeah.
question is there too.
Yeah. Don Mati, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. Hello, sir. Thank you very much for this session. I couldn't attend from the beginning of some personal reasons, but I've started listening while Ravi Sinha sir was explaining the reason. So, while sir was talking about how to counter the Hindu religion, Hindu-based nation, he was talking about should we use whether unity in diversity as a tool to counter that. I don't think that is going to help because India is known for years for unity of diversity, and everybody in India knows that India is like a mini Europe and it is unity in diversity. So I don't think that argument will help much in countering Hindu nation. But what I was thinking is we have seen so many religion based countries like Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so many countries. So can't we bring that concept of how religion based countries have gone down, uh, with religion as a main motto, the development, how it is gone down. So can't we use that to educate people to counter religion-based nation, keeping our religion again? What Sir said is our all our things keeping intact. And one more question I had, which I didn't type here, is most of the communities, especially economically backward communities, they're not worried about what religion we are talking about, and what is it actually all about, and they're only worried about whether they're getting enough food or enough thing to actually continue their daily life. So these are the population which are more there in India as well. It is the entirely different thing I'm talking about. So these people, when they are not worried, and only a major class which are worried about Hindutva and religion and all those things, who are already very comfortable in their lives, um, and most of them are towards a Hindu religion based nation. How do we progress? I mean, it's actually, I myself have a confusion in the second question. Is it that we are only targeting these class of people who are talking about daily, they're talking about religion and this Hindutva and all? What about the other class of people? Are they not required at this point of time? This is the second question. So these two things I just wanted your um, enlighten me in this area actually.
Dr. Virinchi would like to say something now, or?
Uh, shall I ask the? Just I wanted to have some.
Go ahead.
Uh, I work daily with a lot of patients, and I'll be going to the rural areas, and I'll be mingling with all my friends. 100 out of 99 out of 100 are Modi bucks. Modi bucks, and they are totally immersed in this concept of Hindutva, and there, if at all we try to tell them anything, because what I'm thinking is, uh, any place, even in social space or social media or in reality also, there is a rise of this narcissistic tendencies. Those leaders who have this display of this narcissistic tendencies, they are becoming fan of them. They are venerating them. They are in totally, like, they are like slaves, totally slaves. So I'm really worried what is happening. Recently I went to a school. It's a kids school, 6th to 10th class and school. I was asking who among you read books apart from your textbooks. It was a question by me to the kids. One kid raised her hand and she said, I am reading about Modi. I read all the books related to Modi. I asked, Modi has written any books? No, she said, no. The things which are the news or whatever it may be, and the life history of Modi. So she's reading every day, and she says, my life is for Modi. Just you imagine a 8th class girl is telling me this. So I asked her, where you got the book? Where you got those books? So she said, in her village, there is one, this one is running, one in, maybe some Hindutva force. They are distributing the books on the life story of uh, Modi. So just they are, contaminating kids' mental minds with the Hindutva. So just it is maybe a beginning, as if the girl is started reading the Modi books as some personality development, is a great leader, a great something like that. But slowly they injecting the Hindutva ideology into the younger generations, and even everywhere the display of fanism, even in social media, each one start telling we are the fans. Now we have got the movie called OG in Telugu, where there is the hero displays the sword on the stage. I think you might have seen in the on the news. So even further, there is acceptance. Where from this acceptance is coming, even including the elite group, so-called progressives, they're trying to. They're not even condemning that act. No, they are also becoming a part of this display of the fanism everywhere. Everywhere it is there, including from maybe from this kind of cinema heroes too, up to the Modi. Everywhere it is there. So, which was never before in India. Why now? What happened? What changed the Indian psyche, where this kind of a kind of I'm not getting proper words. It's kind of a disease, seriously, a social disease. So why we got this disease? In no way, whatever. Even I am going to tell you that in one of my friends' group, I'm arguing. I'm directly attacking them with abusive words also. I went to such an extent because I'm just worried why these people are so much. Whatever the question you raise, they tell about Muslims. If we ask more questions, go to Pakistan or go to Bengal.
Yes.
There you cannot live. Something like that. They have ready-made answers everywhere. So I'm in such situations. What is happening in India? Can we understand that? And once we understand, then only I think we can sort out some solutions.
Yeah. Very good questions. Subhash, I can make some comments now and then we can go ahead with other round of questions. And I am sorry, Harita raised a question and I didn't come back to that. So I will ask him, let me make some comments on these questions or comments that have come. And then I will come back to Harita's thing. I will need to be reminded about that.
Please.
First, let me make a clarification. I 100% agree with what Malti said, and that is what I meant. When I said unity, I referred to unity and diversity. I was criticizing that. I was saying the same thing that she is saying, that unity in diversity everybody talks about, and yet Hindutva has come to power. And yet all these communal conflagration and all these social contradictions have been in the political arena. So I was also saying the same thing. The slogan unity in diversity may be a good slogan to hear, but it is not very effective because despite all great political leaders and political forces raising that slogan, emphasizing unity in diversity, that has not helped. So it is just a clarification. I meant the same thing, that unity in diversity slogan does not work. We will have to do something more than that. And the fact that the countries where politics is more religion based, okay, what has happened to them, whether it is an Afghanistan or who, I always give the example of Afghanistan, that we were ruled by British, we and Pakistan and Bangladesh, all of us. Afghanistan was never ruled by anybody, okay, and has existed as Afghanistan since middle of 18th century. But even before that has existed as a society, was never ruled by British nor by Tsars, Russia, and all they have ended up in their own 2,000 or 3,000 year old history is with Taliban. So we can blame the British or some other invader, who are they going to blame? They have never been ruled by anybody, and yet all they have come up with, okay, in recent times, America has played havoc, and even Soviets invaded them for a while, but those were a small blips. Largely, Afghan people have been on their own, and they have ended up, bringing Taliban on their head. So the tragedy of religious countries where politics is, religion plays the central role in politics, their tragedy is obvious. But all you can say is that look at Afghanistan, look at some other country, look at today's Turkey, or, whichever country you choose. Maybe soon we will talk about, look at today's America, who knows, America becomes so religion based, you can give counter examples, but that does not explain why people become convinced more easily of religious identities rather than that of some modern form of national identity or some modern form of civilizational identity. Okay, that is the challenge we are facing. That is the challenge we are facing, because, and that relates to what Dr. Virinchi was saying. When Dr. Virinchi says, and very correctly, that the way people have become bhaktas, Modi fans, in a way, Hitler's Germany is being repeated here in India, in the Indian way, but still that is being repeated. 95% of Germany was strongly behind Hitler by the time he had started Second World War. It is not that, the Hitler was making jailing people and punishing people, and people were afraid. That is why they had lined up behind Hitler. That is not at all the case. 95% of Germany, or 90% of Germany, was Hitler's bhakta, Hitler's, staunch psychological followers. That is why I say something similar is happening in India. Okay. And one thing he pointed out, that this was not before. Now, India is a very peculiar case, and that is an interesting question. When Dr. Virinchi is saying that it was not before, why it has happened now? What was India before? By before, I mean, let us say thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago. India, as many scholars have pointed out, is a very peculiar society where life on the ground, social life, was going on continuously, largely delinked from who was ruling, over India or over that part of India. So people have pointed out that India has been largely a political society. Now, no society can be completely apolitical, because whoever rules has to collect taxes and has to, build army, and people have to, bear arms, for the king, and it will have to have its bureaucracy, whatever, level of bureaucracy it will have. So no society can be completely apolitical, but to the extent it is possible, all Indian rulers have learned sooner or later not to interfere in the social and religious life of people. Okay. At times, large-scale political interventions were there. For example, when a big fight was going on between Brahminism and Buddhism, that went on for almost 1,000 years, then, and even then, not always, but there were periods when the fight became largely political. For example, finally, Buddhism was defeated because, for various reasons, it lost royal support. It lost the support of the rulers, by and large. And it was forced to go to the people. And then when it went to the people, Buddhism went to the people, then all kinds of changes, even corruptions in the Buddhist practices happened, like Vajrayana Buddhism came and all that, that's a long story. But other than those exceptional periods, when there was a large-scale religious conflict going on in the society and political players participated in that politics, if you remove those periods of history, by and large, the life of people went on more or less continuously in the same way, no matter who was the ruler. When a new ruler came, temporary disruption was there. The king was defeated. When the king was defeated, his temples were broken. Often it happened that the kings used to have their own gods and temples, and the winning king, the victorious king, will not only defeat the king but also desecrate their temples. All temporary disruptions were there, but when life settled down, it didn't make much of a difference whether the previous king was ruling or a new king was ruling. Okay. So the life was, and when people live with localized religious practices over a period of time, they will learn to live with each other. That is also true. So large scale religious conflict supported by political conflict arises when political conflict takes the lead, when political forces begin to use religious division in the society for political reasons, then people start fighting with those people with whom they have lived, with whom they were not fighting. Just because they belong to other religions, they were not necessarily fighting. Or if they were fighting, they sooner or later they settled into peace, because fighting to the end was impossible. So they had to find a way to settle into peace. But when political forces intervene, then the meaning of religion becomes different. Now, what has happened? India was largely multi-religious, and a small scale simmering religious violence was always there. But large scale religious violence, as it happened in the time of partition, for example, that kind of largest, or as it happened when Buddhists were slaughtered in India, that happens only, with the intervention of politics. What happened in India in modern times? The national movement was organized on the basis of Sarva Dharm Sambhav. Gandhi was the leader, and he was very successful. He was almost a political genius in bringing all religions together with his policy. He started one of his first major political activity was, Khilafat movement. When Khalifa was being abolished in Turkey, Muslims in India were opposed to that, and he supported their cause. Even though Khalifa was a backward idea, regressive idea, reactionary idea, Islam be at the top of all Muslims, a Khalifa, being there. And yet, Gandhi very smartly used that to establish Hindu-Muslim unity within Congress, or at least build a Congress that was based on Hindu-Muslim unity. Okay. So he succeeded, in bringing together this idea of basically Bhakti Sufi kind of idea, that all religions have to live together because all paths lead to God. There can be different paths, but they all lead to the same God. That kind of Sufi Bhakti idea, he adopted. And that worked against the British. And Congress thrived on that. And Nehru, who was not as popular with the masses, he was very popular, but no comparison with Gandhi. Nehru was not a Mahatma. Gandhi was a Mahatma. So Gandhi appeared as a Mahatma. So he was naturally accepted by the Indian masses on a larger scale. And Nehru's acceptance came because Gandhi gave Nehru that power. Nehru respected Gandhi, and Gandhi in indirect ways, almost declared that Nehru will take his work forward. So in the initial decades of independent India, Nehruvian hegemony was a continuation of Gandhian hegemony. And that stopped the communal forces, because that was the original, that was back to old India, that, okay, there are new rulers now, they rule through constitution, but we can live our own life, and we had come together against the British under Gandhi's leadership, and his heir, is Nehru. So we are living under his leadership, so we can live our life, and Nehru can build, his modern India. That was the kind of, roughly speaking, if I am caricaturing that, roughly speaking, that was the mood. But when the Congress hegemony declined, then there was the democratic competition became strong. Various political parties emerged to challenge Congress. And when all the dust settled through emergency, through JP movement, and so on, or when all the dust settled, who gained most? Who rose up to challenge the Nehruvian hegemony? RSS and Hindutva forces. And when this electoral competition became intense, then politics intervened in the social life more than before, than in the Nehru period. So whenever politics interferes in the society, and society is religious, way of life of people is largely religious, then religion turns into communalism. I am saying the obvious thing, but the question that Dr. Virinchi was raising, that it was not before and why it has become now. It has become now because there was an interregnum, there was an intermediate period when Congress hegemony was going down and Hindutva hegemony was arising, and political field was very, all kinds of political forces were there to contend with each other, and they were naturally going to dig into the social mind, and the social mind was religious. So when the social mind is religious, that religion cannot play a political role if there is a separation between social life and political life. But if democracy forces political processes to get entangled with the social mind, and social mind is religious, necessarily, religion will become a political weapon. So the electoral competition, in post-Nehru India has played an important role in creating a situation when religion becomes a political weapon. Add to that the fact that the middle class, there is this, many of you might be aware of this guy, what was his name? Mass Psychology of Fascism guy. I always forget the name. The guy who wrote the book, Mass Psychology of Fascism.
Reich. Is it Reich?
Reich. He made this point that all the middle class who cannot, the little man, what he said, the little man who cannot himself become a Superman is always looks for a Superman, always posits, all his desires, into that Superman. So that is what gave rise to Hitler in the German middle classes, and that is what has given rise to Modi in the Indian middle classes. So this is an additional phenomena. The communal phenomena is general. RSS plays on that. No. But RSS by itself did not give rise to Modi. Emergence of Modi needed RSS, but apart from RSS, it also needed a large middle class which wanted quick economic development, a strong ruler, a strong rule of law, whatever idea it had, and wanted a ruler to set everything right, including show Muslims their place, show Dalits their place, show women their place, rule with a strong hand, and have rapid economic development. If that happens, along with that Superman appears to belong to his religion, appears to belong to speaking his language, the same crude language that he himself speaks, that Superman also speaks. In another Superman is there in America, and you can hear his language, Trump, the kind of language he speaks, and the racist middle class racist Midwestern American thinks that, oh, he is our man, he speaks like us. So all these factors together gave rise to Modi phenomenon. But most important thing is that religion was dragged into politics in a new way in the post-Nehru era, because the Gandhian hegemony had come to an end. And there are other problems also. I don't want to go on and on. All these are very complex phenomena, and there are many facets are there. For example, the socialist Gandhians in India, the Socialist Party kind of Gandhians, they are a separate phenomena, and you will see that they always ended up helping the RSS forces, whether in JP movement or in Anna movement or wherever. Okay, they were always quintessentially against Nehruvian hegemony. They were always against. So there were two forces who were always against Nehruvian modernity. First and foremost were the RSS Hindutva kind, and the other was the socialist kind, the Lohia and other socialist kind. They were always against Nehruvian modernity. So they talked about Indian soil in a way that their ideological connection with RSS, they themselves may not be aware of that connection, but there was an underground ideological connection of this Indian variety of socialism with RSS variety. In the name of populism, in the name of Indian people, in the name of Indian cultural mind, in the name of Indian religions, and so on. So that is what has happened in front of our eyes. We have seen all the last 4 or 5 decades that we have been active. We have seen in our eyes this situation changing from the Nehruvian hegemony to Hindutva hegemony. And for that, competitive electoral democracy coupled with religious social mind, that has given rise to this situation. Post facto, we could not have predicted it, but after it has happened, it is clear enough in front of our eyes. The two questions, one that Harita asked in the beginning itself, and what Dr. Bulusu Srinivasan was saying, I will have to be reminded. Virinchi was saying something, sorry.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you. I have just to continuation. I want to know more about these two things. One is you have said two forces. One is RSS kind of propaganda, one thing against to the modern Nehruvian modernity, and the one is Lohia kind of socialism. So I think I know very less about this second type, that's Lohian socialism. So I want to know more about this, because we may be underestimating its power also, because we are always trying to tell about now it is a time of Modi, so we are talking more about this one, but maybe some undergroundly as undercurrent it might have worked, that Lohivian kind of anti Nehruvian modernism, that I wanted to know. Second thing is, you said one thing previously also, you have said this thing, like in India, lot many people or masses, Indian masses, have never cared who is their king. So is it is it a phenomenon that is appearing only in India, or is any other countries also like that? Why they're not much cared about the king? Just trivial, whenever the king changes, a trivial some rearrangements will be there, but ultimately they are happy with their own lives. So is it related to some geology also, like we have all 6 monsoons, everything come in time, so people don't have to care about who is the king, all the things. So the question is it happening in other countries also? It is only exclusive characteristic of India? That is my question. Thank you, sir.
Subhash, let me respond to this. Should I go ahead? Yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Uh, both very good questions. I must clarify, please do not misunderstand that I am not equating the Lohiite kind of Indian socialism with RSS. They are very different from each other. So as you very appropriately said, there is only an undercurrent that connects them with the RSS kind of ideology. They may or may not be aware of that undercurrent. It may be beyond their control. I would like to believe that they are against RSS, most of them. They are against RSS, but they do not realize that their ideology and their cultural mind beyond their control has an underground connection, undercurrent going from them to the RSS kind of ideology or RSS kind of cultural mind. So I do not equate them. I am just talking about an objective connection that is there and why that undercurrent is there. That undercurrent is there because the Lohiite kind of ideology, by and large, says that there is no fundamental social transformation is needed in the social life of India. Their philosophy is that social life has its own dynamics. It goes on. Those social civilizational characteristics as people live in their life, nobody has a right to change them drastically or do something to change them drastically. So the life of people flows on its own, and the job of politics and economics is to keep track of, bring a better system of justice and a better system of economy without doing any major change to the social life as it flows. As I understand, by and large, is their, whether they articulate it that way or not, that is their philosophy. The only social change they would like to bring about is about the caste structure. Okay. The caste structure they emphasized, and Lohia emphasized it greatly, that in India, caste is class. Okay. So, that part they would like to change, but the way they visualize Indian civilization, they visualize it in the form of actually lived life of Indian people. And that is the difference. Okay. That theirs is a third kind of position. The Hindutva idea is mythological India, is civilizational India. As Dr. Bulusu was pointed out very correctly, that Hindutva idea of India comes from the epics and comes from the Puranas, comes from the narratives, stories. That is an imagined India. So Hindutva idea is an imagined India. What we are proposing is idea of India based on accomplishments of Indian civilization. But all that has happened in Indian history was not just the accomplishments. There were very bad things also happened in Indian history. And we are imagining India that, okay, whatever bad things have happened in history, that we fight on the ground against caste systems, against, inequalities, hierarchies and so on. But still, we are Indians, and we are Indians because we imagine India according to the civilizational accomplishments of India. But the Lohiite idea of India is that the way India has been lived in the life of people. The way people live, that is what India is. So Indian people are India. That Nehru also said, that who Bharat Mata kaun hai, who is Bharat Mata? And then he looked at Indian people and he said that they are the Bharat Mata. That is the popular way of saying it, But Samajwadi, Indian Samajwadi, Lohiite kind of idea is that Indian people as they exist today and as they have always existed, that is equal to Indian civilization. That is a third idea of Indian civilization, and that we find a problem. We find a problem with that because whenever you fight to establish certain desirable values in a society which is living in its own way for thousands of years, in order to establish desirable values, number one, what do you say? Why do you need to establish desirable values if the way people live, actually, that is the only possible way to live, or that is the best way to live? Then why do you fight? Then why do you establish, try to establish some new values in a society? Okay. So that is the difference we have with them, that they say that minor changes like caste hierarchy, representation of castes in the political system, if you do minor changes, we are not going to interfere with the way Indian society lives. Hindutva wants to change that, and left should also want to change that. Hindutva wants to change it in the wrong direction. It wants to create a Hindu religion which was never there, a unified book-based Hindu religion based on one mythology that was never there in India. India always lived through many languages, many religions, many castes, many social practices, and so on. They want to have that kind of bad unity on India based on a bad idea of unified Hinduism. But we also want to change the Indian society, and we want to make it modern, where every individual is equal. Every individual has equal rights, and every individual has equal opportunities, and where the future points towards an educated and cultivated India, which is based on knowledge and science and high culture that we bring to the people. We also want a change. So you see the three, you can compare these. Hindutva wants to take it back. We want to take it forward. We want to change not only the political system and economy, but also the society. And Lohia kind of ideology wants to flow the way social life flows, with minor changes through politics. That is the difference. Now the question of, why is this Indian society especially has been apolitical, that Dr. Virinchi is asking, and there, whatever scholars I read who make this point, none of them give a clear answer. And I don't think a clear answer is possible. So one can only make guesses. One of the guesses is, there are two things come to my mind, two broad things. Of course, there must be 1,000 reasons for that, but two broad things come to my mind. And one you pointed out is that India has been a very special land. India has been protected. The subcontinent, by India, I mean the subcontinent, has been protected in the sense that in the south, on the three sides, it is ocean. And in the north, there is a big mountain. And most of the outsiders came through the passes, the narrow passes, in the northwestern Himalayas, and so on. So it was a protected land, and the immigration that has come to India, other cultures which have come to India, it has been a very slow immigration, spread across, thousands of years. What was India here? Most of politics in India has come from outside. Politics in the sense that large scale, Indian scale of politics has come from outside. Whether the coming of Aryas or Brahminical Vedic civilization arising in northwest India and spreading, starting from Afghanistan and Gandhar and Kashmir and all those parts, and then spreading to the rest of India, or later on Muslims, or later on British. Large scale politics came from outside. It was not that the internal politics was not there. Internal politics was there. But it was very spread out, and it was very localized, so that large-scale politics, India was never able to confront, whether of Aryas or of Muslims or of British. That's one fact. And when they came, the first ones which came, the Vedic, those who are called Aryas, they developed a social philosophy or social hierarchy where Brahmins were almost Devatulya, they were separate from all the others rest. In between, gradually, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, they emerged. But they started with Brahmins and others. So there was a very small population which over 1,000-year period became ideologically dominant, ideologically hegemonic. And it became ideologically hegemonic by not making everybody like them. It became ideological hegemonic by them becoming different from everybody else and yet being better than everybody else, which is not what happens, if you look at look at China, that kind of separation. There was a ruling class separation. There was a Mandarin separation. Educated people were recruited as rulers, and they became the rulers of the empire or the bureaucracy of the empire. There was no this kind of difference between Brahmins and others or Savarnas and others. So if you combine these two things, that the rulers in India were very small sections, and they did not want to make rest of India like them. They found it more, India was so large, and in India, Indian people were so accustomed to their living life, their own way for thousands of years, that for a small group to rule over a large country, the easiest way they found was to let them be the way they are, as long as they pay taxes or they supply men for their armies or they agree to become part of their kingdom. Let them be. So these are speculations. These are kind of hand-waving arguments about why India has been largely apolitical. Nobody has a very solid, clear answer, but we can speculate along these lines.
Thank you, sir.
Please, please comment, Greenji, please.
No, thank you. Wonderful explanation, sir. I got a lot of clarity. So finally, one just addition to this is Lohia kind of, that politics almost similar to the kings of India. Like, just don't disturb the social fabric. So let it continue.
When you're responding, Dr. Bulu had raised his hand. When you are responding.
I totally agree with Ravi that Lohia politics are mostly caste-based socialism, and then that's really a wonderful way of looking at it. And the result is obviously, we can see that the caste-based regional parties, emergence of caste-based regional parties, not only just in North India, but even in South India, that led to the formation of these regional parties. And now they are turning into some of them, at least, they were part of the Hindutva project, and then they withdrew from the Hindutva for some time, and again they emerged. They are now some of them are mingling with the Hindutva, and some of them are coming out. So it's going on. So absolutely, you're right that Lohiite politics have led to the caste awareness, and ultimately the caste identity has been defeated by the Hindutva identity. So people, this is a kind of strange phenomenon with Indians. Like, we need to keep our both caste and religious identities at the same time together. So obviously in this structure where we want to keep this dual identity, where we want to keep our caste as well as religion, obviously there will be marginalized sections like Dalits, who have no role in both in the caste as well as religious structures. They are marginalized. And of course, the Muslims, now the villains of the Hindutva, so-called villains of the Hindutva. So these two are actually the marginalized sections in this new emergence of the societal order. But I mean, we really have to see this in this context. That and then finally, what this Hindutva agenda is helping is chronic capitalism, and then building a very nasty, rich societies, pockets of rich societies in which the prime minister himself defends that do you want everybody to be poor in this country, when he was asked that the difference between the rich and poor is increasing. So obviously the agenda of Hindutva is to create this, and people, I don't know whether people have realized this aspect and then they're comfortable with it, or there will be a time when they realize that this system of chronic capitalism is not really going to be sufficient, it will fail. I believe that there is a big chance of, in the new emerging world order with the East raising to the top of the core in the entire controlling the entire world order. There will be some equations will be changing. People will realize that it's not anymore. I mean, there is some um, uh, initiation of the disillusionment in the powerfulness of our so-called leader, the strongman. And then I think both in India and US, people started realizing that obviously their leaders are not that omnipotent and who can control anymore the world scenarios, the Viswa Gurus. They are not anymore that. So there is some realization happening in the ground, but it may take some time, and it may take some drastic events as well to realize that that's not the case. But at the same time, I really agree with you that the low hate politics have led to this caste consciousness arising, and which is ultimately defeated by the larger person or the larger mythical based Hindutva identity. So yeah, thank you very much for the explanation. Yeah.
Harita, can you remind, you raised some question and I never came back to that, so, can you repeat that?
Yeah, one question and one thought. That for the question you already responded. Actually, I was looking at what aspect of Indian civilizational depth politics is something that we can own. Um, that's what I was looking at it, and you talked about um, how this this Sanskritic Vedic thing and the dilemma around that and owning that identity. So that has been talked about. The second aspect was that if there is a conservative, right wing, authoritarian, and electoral democratically elected power across the globe, then how do we explain that bit? Because if you look at it, system, society, and civilization aspect, it looks like it is not so much the civilizational aspect. It looks we should be able to explain through dynamic between the system and society if it is a global thing. That's the another comment that I was making.
Yeah, I think what you are saying in the second part, that is also true. It is a global phenomenon. And that forces us to look at the role of religion and other identities, basically religious identity and race-based identities, role of that in history of the world all over, across all countries. And what we realize is that the modernity, like, end of royalty, end of feudalism, coming of modern times, capitalism and democracy and reason, rationality, science, and all that, this was such a new phenomenon that we all talk about this new phenomenon all the time. Even the scholars talk about, this new phenomenon all the time, as if what was happening in the world was only capitalism and modernity. It is true that capitalism and modernity came to the head, came to lead the world. But pick any country, even in Europe or West, and see that has there ever been a country where the role of identity or role of religion has been zero? And you will find that it has never been zero. all the time. So all the time, these two things were happening. Modernity and capitalism was happening. And according to the formal definition, both capitalism and modernity have nothing to do with religion. Okay, modernity is based on equality of individuals and reason, rationality, science, and so on, argument, equal rights. And capitalism is based on a rule that operates in a religious society, but it is not driven by religion. It is independent of religion. And yet both capitalism and modernity have always been planted in a society that has been religious. Every society, wherever it has been planted, the society has been religious. Also, other identities have been there, Chinese and Arabs and Iranians and Indians and Germans and French and so on, So all those identities have continued and religions have continued. And on top, in that soil, this modernity and capitalism has been planted. So it is good that you raise that question. We should realize that when we talk of modernity and capitalism, this is not the sum total of world reality. Sum total of world reality is modernity and capitalism being planted in a social civilizational soil where religion has existed for thousands of years and still exists as strongly as ever. And other identities, us versus them, has existed all the time, all through history, and those identity-based separations have not gone away. So somewhere the harvest has been not very bloody, harvest of capitalism and modernity, and at other places the harvest has been bloody. And then in 20th century, an intellectual fashion arose which said that whenever you plant modernity and capitalism in a society and that society becomes violent, then all the blame has to be on modernity and capitalism. But that is very one-sided blaming. The society on its own may be simmering with violence, and capitalism and modernity may accentuate or may aggravate that violence. But that does not mean that the violence has nothing to do with the religious society or traditional society or the civilization as it had existed. So both the things are to be taken into account, and that is why our views become sometimes unpopular. People say that, oh, you are blaming people for partition, okay? And we say that, no, we are not blaming people. We are just recognizing the reality that when partition happened, partition may have happened because of British, manipulation, or because of Congress weakness, or because of Muslim League's wrong ideology. But all three political forces, the British, Congress, and Muslim League, none of them were inciting people to kill each other when partition was happening. And when more than 1 million people were killed and an army did not kill them, people killed people, then that cannot be, and that was triggered by political developments of independence and partition. And yet nobody, it is not the case that if there was no division among people, then necessarily that would have led to that kind of violence. So the seeds of that violence were there in the people also. Political developments contributed to partition violence, but people cannot be absolved from the responsibility of killing each other. So that is what we point out, and this more or less is the story all over the world. So when in the golden period of capitalism between 1945 and 1970, in golden period of capitalism in Europe and America, when liberal capitalism was successful, then it appeared as though capitalism and modernity have put religion in its place, and now religious violence is not going to take place and religious mobilization will not take place. But you see, when that golden period ended with Reagan and Thatcher, And when this right wing has come to power, and when this triangle of capital and people and a state has been established, where the job of a state is to manage people and help capital. That is what it has become. So, and people can be managed through religion. People can be managed through identities. Political power can be won by underlining religion, religious identity, and race identity, and other identities. Then this problematic situation has arisen all over the world, that people are being managed through identities, so that when a state serves capital, nobody raises a question. When a state just nakedly gives all the assets to capital, nobody raises a question, because people are being managed through religion. That is the only major issue that politics has brought into their life, us versus them. That is what is happening, and that is happening more or less all over the world, because all over the world religion has been there in the society, and identities have been in the society. And the period of success of liberal capitalism made this thing partly invisible, partly made religion less visible, or identities less visible. But as soon as liberal capitalism came into crisis, you see that all these demons, all these monsters are raising their head, and religion is becoming a political weapon, and identities are becoming a political weapon.
There was a small question related to your mandal politics. Is there? He says that the two politics are not they are not contradictory but complementary.
And to add to that, the liberal capitalism, the end of liberal capitalism, as you pointed out, may not be necessarily due to its insufficiencies, but the limitations of the capitalism itself. That the equations of the resources of capitalism started, depleting very fast. By within 3 decades, we started seeing the crisis. So there is some inherent problem within the capitalism that it cannot sustain for longer periods without minor or major sort of crisis in its developing. So we are seeing that. I mean, the 2008 crisis and the present crisis and etc. So probably there is this inherent in the equation of capitalism itself. Probably it is inbuilt that every 2-3 decades, probably the resources for the expansion of capitalism are limited, and then the to share the profits of the capitalism, the religious forces or the fundamental forces of all the societies will start emerging with the so-called demons to claim the larger share. Yeah, I think that makes some sense. Yeah. And probably that's the reason why when Harita was asking about that rise of right wing and the final transition of the world order in the last 2 decades, why the globe has been overtook by the right wing forces, fascistic forces again, it's probably the reasons are rooted in the limitations of the capitalism itself.
I must clarify, Subhash, one good question has come. I don't know the name. It has come from iPhone. No, I must clarify. It's good that you raised this question. I am not saying that if Hindutva is to be defeated today in the electoral arena through Mandal, through caste census, through trying to take majority of Indian population, which is OBC plus Dalit and so on, away from the influence of Hindutva, and for that their caste-based oppression is to be underlined, I am with that. I am not opposing that. So it is a good thing that Rahul Gandhi or Congress party is raising the question of representation, raising the question of caste census, raising the question that majority of Indian population, or 80 or 90% of Indian population, is not properly represented and is being pushed to the wall. That is a good strategy to take in the electoral arena. I am with that strategy. And I think that left should go along with that. Left should go along with underlining the question of caste census or caste-based, affirmative action, caste-based reservations, and so on. There is no escape from that, because India is such a entrenched hierarchical society that you have to look at reality. How can you make a dent in the reality? And in order to make a dent in the reality, if for a short period of time caste identity becomes underlined, caste identity becomes more pronounced in order to claim justice, I have no problem with that. I understand that. That comes not from somebody's wrong ideology, Rahul Gandhi's wrong ideology about caste. It comes from Indian reality. So I must clarify that. When I was talking about the Lohiite kind of ideology, I was talking about a long-term strategy, an ideological standpoint, the approach to be taken to Indian society as it exists. While today it may be necessary to bring the large sections of OBC and other oppressed caste, Dalits and so on, from influence of Hindutva in order to snatch them from Hindutva, so to speak. If you want to underline their caste-based rights, that I have no problem with that. I should clarify that. But in the long run, social movements and the left and everybody has to ask the final question. Not final question, I mean this question, that in the long run, when you visualize India 100 years or 200 years down the line, do you want caste identities to continue, or do you want caste identity to get dissolved? And I think the answer is that in the long run, we want caste identities to go away, caste identities to become historical, so that 100 years down the line, our future generations will talk without any problem. They will say, oh, my ancestors used to be Dalits, or my ancestors used to be Yadavas, or whoever. They start talking in that language, that my ancestors belong to this or that caste. I don't belong to any caste anymore, or I may belong to many castes because, many castes have contributed in my identity or my, coming into existence. That is how I think we should visualize India in the long future. So the social movements have to answer the question that immediately a Dalit has to fight as a Dalit, because Dalit has been oppressed as a Dalit. So the resistance or the fight to start with will be as a Dalit. But would Dalit will fight today so that 100 years down the line, Dalit becomes the ruling caste, of future India? Is that the goal? So the Dalit identity continues. If they have been oppressed for 3,000 years, they should get at least 1,000 years, starting 2100, AD, 1,000 years to become the ruling caste of India. Is that the ideology? No. I think the ideology has to be that there will be no longer Dalits and Brahmins in an India of 22nd century or 23rd century. And if in the beginning, our fight is bound to underline caste identity, in the long run, how our fight is going to dilute caste identity, these two contradictory time scales, that is the challenge social movements have, and that is the challenge we on the left have. How to organize our ideology and our political struggle in such a way that immediately we fight on caste basis, but we fight caste basis not to make caste permanent. We fight in order to make caste go away. And that is why we underline the question of modernity in the social arena. That is why we say that in the system, our project is socialism, replace capitalism with socialism. And in society, our project is bring modernity. Modernity means all individuals are equal. And traditional identities of communities, they become historical. they do not remain as politically operative identities. So our children and their children start talking about caste in historical sense, that, oh, my family belonged to this caste 100 years ago. No longer. No longer. So how do we organize our immediate struggle while keeping in mind the long-term struggle of dissolution of caste? That is the challenge. And that social movements, I mean, we on left can be blamed for not having thought hard enough about it. But I would say that even social movements, have not thought hard about it, that how to fight as a Dalit so that Dalit identity gets dissolved. All caste identities get dissolved.
Parivartan, please unmute yourself and raise your question. Parivartan.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yeah. You're audible.
I have 3 questions. One is that I agree with this argument that Indian society needs a social transformation. Completely, I agree with it. And also the idea of that Indian project has to come about, that which foregrounds the good things that Indian history has to offer to the world and to its people. But my question is that when we talk about that, this idea first has to be dissipated into the, say, the intelligentsia or the political or the middle classes. Uh, isn't this logic reproduces the logic of before, in the sense that this kind of knowledge was already had like, for example, say philosophy other than bhakti had been confined to these kind of places, and this logic will be reproduced. If My question is, how do you link the Indian project? First it goes to this group, then how does this idea go to the social realm? That's my one question. My other question is the question on the lumpen proletariat, in the sense that the people who have been perpetually been unemployed and do not have any other ways at trying to live their lives uh, as whatever way is open to them. So it's a question of when people who have too much of time at their hand because they are unemployed, they tend to go into this realm of social identities far more than, this is argued in a lot of places, that far more into the realm of social identities and get entrenched into, say, non-modern uh, identities, non-modern realm. So that is one question, if I'm able to. Yes, these are my two questions largely.
Are very good questions. First, let me first take the thing that any idea of India or any idea, whatever, if you start with a small section, what I call one vanguard and which can be called elite, how does it become accepted by the masses? Because otherwise it will generate some new kind of hierarchy. There will be these new Brahmins, so to speak, the new philosophers, the new modernist philosophers, who will know all the answers, and who will then conceptualize what is India, and they are the ones only they will know. Of course, if the idea of India of a new kind gets confined to the vanguard, it will become elitist idea and our purpose is defeated. But the reason because we are realists, we realize the difficulty. That is why we are saying that in the beginning, it will be an idea, confined to the vanguard or confined to progressive elite, you can say. Because that you are given an Indian society which is very heavy. Some left vanguard cannot lift it, so to speak. India is too heavy to be lifted easily on our shoulders, and then carried to some other period of history. So that is why. But when you go to the other end and say that, come up only with those ideas which can immediately become popular. If you say that, and all that we have discussed, this morning, that societies are given, societies have lived for thousands of years. There are customs and traditions and ideas and religions and identities in the society. And in such a society, you say that come up with ideas only those which can immediately become popular, then it becomes self-defeating. You will have to be ready to come up with an idea objectively, which is needed by the whole society, and the society is not ready to accept it. The idea that is needed by the society, needed for the transformation of society, those ideas are not acceptable to the society. That is where the story begins. And then what do you do? When you say that you will forever keep your ideas in the exclusive domain of the vanguard, then the purpose is defeated. But the purpose is also defeated if you say that only those ideas are we should come up with which are immediately accepted by the society. So the ideas that are immediately accepted by the society will not be very transformative ideas. And this is what, politics is about. How do you come up with ideas that are needed by society and make them palatable to the society in the long run, even if society is today not ready for that? And that is why we point out, for example, I can bring in that term that was today was not discussed, is that axial revolution. That is why we pick on the idea of axial revolution. All the large religions which today are accepted by the masses, they were very elite ideas. Most of the, before Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on, very large religions. Hinduism is large in population, but Hinduism is a diverse kind of religion, not based on one book and one institution. But let us leave that aside. Those large canonical kind of book-based religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and so on, they were very elite ideas. That is where the prophets, the intellectuals, the rishis, played a role. And then over a period of time, in conjunction with politics, they became acceptable to the masses. When they became acceptable to the masses, they became acceptable to the masses as a mythological ideas, that God sent those prophets to the masses with the truth, But those prophets, I am sure, knew that they are calling that ideas of God because that is how it will become easily acceptable to the masses. That was a strategy. Okay, but the idea was very elite. Idea was based on another world, transcendental world, the world that was very different from this earthly world, this world on this earth, And the idea was that people should live according to the other world, according to Swarg, according to paradise, according to the transcendental world. So it was a very elite idea that became a mass idea in few hundred years. I am giving this example not to imitate it, but to point out that transformative ideas are always elite ideas. And the success comes from finding a way to make those elite ideas mass ideas, And if you want to make those ideas mass ideas too early, then you will fail. And if you only come up with the ideas that are by makeup acceptable to the masses, then you haven't even started. Because if the ideas are to be such that they are immediately acceptable to people, then society on its own will change. And then there will be no need of ideology and politics. There is no need of vanguard. There is no need of intervention. There is no need of agency. So if the need of agency is there, intervention is there, politics is there, philosophy is there, knowledge and idea is there, then the idea has to be elite in the beginning, but it must become a mass idea in due course. And that is always the challenge for politics, how to come up with the transformative ideas which are objectively needed by the society, but they are not acceptable to the society as society lives today. that was the first thing. What was the second thing you were saying? The what is
Lumpen proletariat.
lumpen voices. Well, that is a more immediate challenge. You know, it has worked very well for Hindutva philosophy, and it works very well for fascists, because fascists find the resources to employ a large section of the lumpen in their project. In India, it becomes easy because in India, the religious economy is very large economy. India is a society where religion and religion-based institutions play a daily role in organizing the life of the people. There are very few societies like that. You know, there are large religious institutions like the Vatican or like the churches, you know, or like Islamic institutions, which play that role in a more ideological way. But in India, Hinduism as well as Islam adopts a mode of operation such that day-to-day life is organized by religious institutions and religious leaders. And that religious institutions and leaders and mathas and temples, they have been taken over by and large, not all of them, but they by and large, they help the RSS and Hindutva political philosophy. So the large amount of resources, money and other resources are available to RSS through temples and mathas to organize and intervene daily life, daily social life of Indian people at large. Other than Indian state, there is no other force that makes that much of a difference in the daily life of people. Religion is not belief only. Religion is not way of worship only. Religion is daily organizer of life in India. The density of temples, the density of mathas, the density of other religious institutions, and the land they own, the property they own, the money they have, the contributions they gain from all over the world, and of course from India, you know, is enormous resource to be deployed into managing the daily life. And now in the political atmosphere of Hindutva, they are employing a large section of these lumpens. So it works very well to have a very large unemployed class, provided they have large resources to keep them in their service, or at least dominant sections of the lumpil elements in their service. So these two things go together. You have to have large number of unemployed, and you have to have separately large resources to employ a significant segment of that. That option we leftists will never have. We leftists, whatever money we raise and whatever resources we raise, will never be able to compete with the religious assets and religious resources. So we have no option but to depend on a state. A state is the only other force which is legally in a position to intervene in life on a larger scale through money and through law and through political power. Left cannot come to state power on its own in India right now. So the best the left can hope is that secular, liberal, modernist bourgeois comes to power, and learning from its defeat at the hand of Hindutva, hopefully that liberal bourgeois will strengthen state institutions in such a way that it can be taken out of the grip of the RSS or communal forces. As RSS has infiltrated all state institutions, Hindutva has infiltrated all state institutions. It's a very big project to weed them out, you know, and to take control of these state institutions. Left cannot take control of these state institutions. So there is no escape for left to depend on secular liberal bourgeois, learning from its own defeat, to create a secular state in such a way that even if it serves bourgeoisie, it does not get defeated by religious communal forces. That is the only realistic hope we can have. And we can collaborate, left can collaborate with progressive bourgeois only in the hope that the progressive bourgeois, learning from its own disaster and defeat, will take the ground away from the feet of Hindutva. And for that it will take a different strategy to build a state institutions whose role can be protected against infiltration by religious influence. I mean, again, these are words, and this, what I'm saying is wishful thinking. I don't know which bourgeois force will be able to do that. But what can we do? We have to fight with whatever we have got. They are dominating. They have a state, all the resources of a state, and they always had all the resources of religion and religious institutions. So they are in such a powerful position that it becomes very difficult to fight them, not only for left, but also for progressive bourgeois. And that is the tragedy that India right now is going through. So whatever we have at our hand, we have to fight with that. What is other escape is there? And it is getting late, so we should, I think, we will be concluding soon. And let me just add one more thing, that a state being religion, we cannot snatch away from them. Okay, there is no way to snatch religion. We are not going to become religious, and we are not going to run religious institutions, and nobody will allow us to run religious institutions. Okay, all Shankaracharyas, recognize who we are. They are not going to give any room to us. So religion, we can't snatch away from them. Only a state can be snatched away from them. And if a state is snatched away from them, then even the idea of India then can be propagated through state, through its education system, through textbooks, through helping real intellectuals, real historians. All Romila Thapars and Harbans Mukhia, they have fought, for secularism in the textbooks, and they have been kind of attacked by Hindutva forces, but there has not been a large-scale political support to them. This fight is political. Only when progressive secular forces gain a state and they give support to Romila Thapars of future, or Irfan Habibs of future, only then there is hope that our idea of India, which right now sounds like an intellectual idea, will become a mass cultural idea of India. For that, a state is needed. So the first fight is to snatch whatever state it is, no matter what kind of a state right now exists, snatch that state from them through democratic means. There is no escape from that.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you everyone for joining this conversation. We began this meeting with the understanding that it's a curtain raiser for the 5-day meeting. So you would have noticed that the presentation and the discussion which ensued. So the 5 days also, all these things will continue. So I will request everyone to join the meeting. If you have made any plans, you are still ambivalent about it, please make plan to join the meeting and come to Hyderabad 11 to 15 October. Ravi, you want to say something? कुछ कह रहे हैं तुम? नहीं. So thank you all for joining. We'll meet in Hyderabad. All of us will meet in Hyderabad 11.
ठीक है, बाय, फिर मिलते हैं फिर. Yeah, see you then. Bye.